Hello, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Learning for Good. This is my very first episode of Learning for Good, and I'm so excited to start with such an important topic: creating lasting DEI change in your nonprofit. If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I help nonprofit learning and development leaders develop the skills their organization's staff and volunteers need to scale your organization's mission and create greater impact, even in a virtual world. And today's episode is for all nonprofit leaders, because we are going to talk about the 5 things nonprofit leaders can do to create lasting DEI change. So many nonprofits are releasing DEI statements, setting diversity goals, creating diversity training, and hoping to create a culture where all of their staff and all of their volunteers feel like they belong. So I'm excited to share these 5 things that nonprofit leaders can do to create lasting DEI change in their organization. Now, this is based on my own experience consulting organizations around their DEI goals. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to share with you all today. So let's dive in to today's episode of Learning for Good. All right, I'm so excited to share with you these 5 things that nonprofit leaders can do to create lasting DEI change in their organization. The most foundational thing you can do is build trust. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about today. If staff and volunteers don't feel safe, every DEI effort will fail. Build trust. So how do we do that? How do we build trust? The first thing to think about is we want to make sure we're being open and honest about why we want to create DEI change in the first place. Open and honest. We want to be transparent about any parameters that might exist going into this change process, because it is a change. Just like Meatloaf saying, right? I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. Just like that, we need to identify what we are willing to change and what we're not willing to change. Is there anything that is off limits? A wise researcher once told me, you never collect data that you don't plan to use. The same applies here. We don't want to ask people to engage in a DEI effort if we don't plan to follow through. So if you aren't planning to, say, drop existing donors, say that, but share what you are willing to do, like add new donors. Be transparent about any parameters that exist. This helps us build trust. And then think about listening, really listening to the people around you. Instead of casting a vision and providing direction, which might be what feels comfortable to us as nonprofit leaders, we want to take the time to listen to what our staff have to say, to what our volunteers have to say, to what the people that we serve have to say. We want to listen. What are their experiences? What are their hopes for the organization? What's working for them and what isn't? When we listen, we open ourselves up to all new ideas, all new voices, all new inputs, and it helps us build trust. That leads me to the next thing you can do to create lasting DEI change, and that is to assess what's working and what's not. You may have some ideas, but it's important to hear from others. And this is where that listening piece is going to be so important. Seek out the input from not just your trusted advisors, but also from those you wouldn't normally hear from. Talk to your audience, the people that you serve. Talk to your staff, talk to your volunteers. Just as we talked about, that helps build trust. It also helps you understand what's working and what's not. But also Think about talking to other organizations. Maybe there are other nonprofits in your community and you want to hear what's working for them and what's not. Maybe there are other organizations, for profit or nonprofit, that serve the same audience you do, and you want to hear from them what's working and what's not. Think about which organizations you can talk to and learn from. And then review data if you have it. If you have employee engagement surveys, that's data. If you have program satisfaction surveys from the people that you serve, right? That's data. And there's a lot we can learn from the information we already have. And then identify those pain points that you're hearing. What are the challenges that people have when they're experiencing your organization? But also remember to stop and celebrate those successes. You're going to hear great things too, the good feedback and the bad. So celebrate those things that are going well and identify those things that could be improved. That's what we're going to do as we're assessing what's working and what's not. So as you're doing this assessment, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to use the information that you're learning to co-create a vision, goals, and common language for your DEI efforts. That's the third thing to do when you're looking to create lasting DEI change. Co-create with those around you. What is your vision moving forward? What goals do you have? What common language should we be using? So now that you have more information about what's working and what isn't working, engage your staff, engage your board, engage your partners and the people that you serve, and allow them to help you co-create a vision for your organization. What aspects of diversity are missing and need to be intentionally included? What does a more inclusive organization even look like or feel like? What barriers might exist to achieving a more diverse or a more inclusive organization? What might it look like for everyone to feel like they belong? You're going to hear from those around you and co-create that vision for where you want to be, where you want to go. And then you're going to set goals for how to get there. Our goals should be specific and they should be measurable. And this might be where you're comfortable as a nonprofit leader, but it's important to do some of those other things first. Now that you have that vision, start to set those goals. And then establish that common language for all staff and volunteers. You're seeking to create a more diverse organization or to serve a different community than you've served in the past. What do you mean by that? When you say diversity in the organization, what do you mean by diversity? What do you mean when you say you want everyone to feel included? What is inclusion to you? And you guys can shape that together. What are these common terms that we're going to use as we go after these goals that we've set in order to achieve that great vision that we've co-created? Now that you have your vision and your goals and that common language, you can move into the fourth thing that you can do to create lasting DEI change. And that is to start identifying and implementing the tactics. Again, this might feel comfortable for you as a nonprofit leader. It might be something that you have an operations person that's really good at and you feel strongly that you can delegate successfully. And this is also where learning and development leaders often get engaged in the process. So tactics may include incorporating DEI into your strategic plan, or starting employee resource groups, making your facilities more accessible, changing your marketing efforts in some way, diversifying your partner list, providing diversity training to all staff and volunteers. Your tactics are going to vary, and it's going to vary based on what is your vision and which goals did you set, right? But there are going to be tactics involved, and this is the part where you get to identify what are those things that are going to help me achieve those DEI goals and start to implement those things. But here's the thing. A lot of nonprofit leaders skip to this step, but this step will be so much more effective if you've also built trust, if you've assessed what's working and what isn't working, if you've co-created that vision, those goals, and that common language first. Now, you may think once you've reached this point of tactics, you're done. But remember, we're always seeking to create lasting DEI change, which means we have to consistently learn and grow. That's why the next thing you can do to create lasting DEI change is to continuously listen and adapt. This may mean asking people along the way, what's working and what isn't working as you implement those tactics that you identified. This may mean reviewing data points to see if changes are occurring. Think back to the data points you used in the beginning as you were assessing what was working and what wasn't. Are you seeing a change? Are you seeing any progress on those same data points? This may mean implementing employee engagement surveys. Maybe you've never done one before, but you want to hear from staff now. Implementing an employee engagement survey is a great way to listen to your staff. But you want to make sure, whatever you do, you're always listening, always learning, and always adapting if you want to see lasting DEI change in your nonprofit. I know so many of you want this for your organization, but many just aren't sure where to start. Doing these 5 things will help you create lasting DEI change. Build trust. Assess what's working and what isn't. Co-create that vision, those goals, and the common language that you will use. Identify and implement the tactics to reach those goals, and listen and adapt over time. If you want to get started with your DEI efforts, to include creating virtual diversity training, head over to my website and let's work together to help your staff and volunteers feel like they really belong.